Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cowan-Smith. Tonight, Nigeria is on course for presidential polls this weekend. Last Saturday's vote was postponed for a week at the last minute, but officials say that this time it's all systems go. And Senegal's also due for an election. So President Macky Sall is hoping for a second term from Sunday's poll. Candidates on all sides are wooing religious leaders as their voices carry a lot of weight in their communities. And we hear from a Kenyan activist whose work in changing attitudes amongst Massai communities on female genital mutilation is reckoned to have saved about 15,000 girls from having to undergo the practice. Nice Nailantei Leng'ete has seen her campaigning get her into being named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people of the year in 2018. But first, Nigeria's Electoral Commission says it's second time lucky for the rescheduled elections and that they will go ahead this weekend. Presidential and parliamentary polls were supposed to happen last Saturday, but on the morning of voting were pushed back by a week. The delay was blamed on logistic hold-ups. President Muhammadu Buhari is up for re-election for the ruling APC. His main rival is the opposition PDP's Atiku Abubakar. Both sides have been accusing each other of trying to rig the vote. Well, Chika Odua joins us now with more. Chika, what has changed between last weekend and this weekend? Why should voters believe authorities are any more ready for the polls than they were last Saturday?
Well, I don't actually believe that they're even more confident. There's a lot of anxiety here in Nigeria about just what is going to happen on Saturday. Nigerians are wondering if the Independent Electoral Commission will actually be able to deliver to the Nigerian people what it has promised, and that is a free and fair, credible election. Even politicians have come out to voice their doubts, voice their concerns, including the president, Muhammadu Buhari. Earlier this week, the president gave a very sound warning to anyone who is planning to rig the elections, anyone who's planning to steal any ballot boxes at the polling stations. He even ordered police and military officials to, quote unquote, be ruthless to anyone who is seen doing anything suspicious at the polling station. So there's a lot of tension in Nigeria, and Nigerians really just want this election to come and go so that we can get back to our normal lives. But the Electoral Commission is guaranteeing that everything is going to go on time and that Nigerians will be able to have confidence in what will happen on Saturday.
Well, we will be following the run-up to that vote very closely, as well as the way it plays out on the day itself. Thanks very much, Chika Odua, there for us in Abuja. In other news, Senegal is also just a few days shy of presidential elections. Its polls are on Sunday, and they will see President Macky Sall hoping for an outright win in his bid for a second term. As candidates try to gather votes, the opinions of religious leaders go a long way. Our correspondent sent us this report.
The holy city of Touba is home to the most prominent Muslim brotherhood in Senegal, called the Mouride. No candidate can afford to ignore it on the campaign trail. Presidential hopefuls come here one by one to seek prayers from the religious leader and to present their platform in hopes of getting his endorsement. Even implied support can impact the vote of the Brotherhood's followers. It's a tradition that also means a lot to many voters.
You can't lead Senegal if you don't believe in God. Whatever the level of impurity of the person that wants to become president, there has to be a minimum of faith or belief.
You have to charm that constituency to get a few more votes.
In Touba, the religious leader's staff reject the idea he might influence the election.
No, there are no instructions given for the election. The chief of the Mouride in particular, who I'm close to, is neutral. That's important, but it doesn't mean that in his heart he won't choose one or the other whose program he approves of.
The influence of religious leaders over young voters has diminished, according to this researcher. However, it remains a tradition rooted in Senegalese culture.
The role of religion is a constant, as is the fact politicians are aware of its influence over voters. The influence of religion over public opinion is important. Now, whether mathematically that translates into votes in elections, that's the big question we're working on, and we don't have a specific answer.
In Senegal, 95% of the population is Muslim, and the majority of them belong to one of the country's main Muslim brotherhoods, the Mouride, the Tidiane, Layen or Hadria.
Well, with me now is Kenyan human rights activist, a Kenyan human rights activist whose work has won her a place on last year's Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Nice Nailantei Leng'ete has been trying to stop the practice of female genital mutilation. She herself narrowly escaped having to undergo cutting when she was a child because she ran away from the Massai village she lived in. She returned and she ran away again, eventually managing to convince her grandfather not to make her go through the ritual. Well, today, her work in trying to change attitudes in Kenya to FGM has saved an estimated 15,000 girls around the country from the cut and child marriage. She joins me now. Nice, thanks so much for coming in to see us. It's a real pleasure. Your approach has been very much about trying to start a conversation about female genital mutilation. Yeah. And you managed to convince the elders in your village to stop the practice. Yeah. Eventually, elders of all Massai agreed to stop FGM. Yeah. Were you surprised by the scale of your success?
Yes, I think I would say I was surprised because I was not really waiting for it to happen that fast. But remember, in the community that I'm coming from, the Maasai community, you cannot assume the position of male leadership. As women, we cannot decide for anything, even for our own body. Decision is made by men. So as much as we are talking about female genital mutilation or any form of gender-based violence, remember it's not a women issue. Men also need to be involved so that they need to understand the importance of marrying these uncircumcised, women. They need to understand the importance of taking their daughters to school. And even for the boys when they are growing up, remember in future their husbands, in future their fathers. How do we teach them also to respect women, not just to protect women from female genital mutilation or child marriage?
So what exactly is the strategy you use when you go into a new community? Because you also work currently you work for AMREF, yes. Health Africa, and you run a project that goes from village to village trying to convince people to stop FGM. Because even though it was officially stopped, it still gets carried out. Yeah. What is the strategy you use when you meet a new community?
What we do with the support of AMREF Health Africa, remember this is about changing behavior. This is about changing attitude. And this is a culture that has been there for hundreds of years. So change does not take or happen in a day. So patience is really key. So what I've been really trying to do is to raise awareness among both women and men and also girls to understand their rights. But morely is to look at it on a human rights-based approach because the law is there, but it's not enough. We really need to have community dialogues with the community member. It's about gender equality again. It's about investing again in education for girls the same way we are giving boys education. But what we've also been able to do is to help the community to come up with an alternative rites of passage, which is a community-led movement that is simply saying we have what is good in our culture. How can we retain that? And in the whole process of female circumcision, what is wrong is the cut. Let us remain with our beautiful culture. What is wrong, we do away with it. And that is what we want to replace with education. So that is simply what I've been doing. My work basically daily is just going to different communities and talking to community members.
And how is your message generally received by the girls themselves? I mean, if you imagine, you're talking about communities where girls are are not able to challenge men's positions. And their one moment of being in the limelight is this moment of going through the rite of passage. How do you convince them that it's not in their best interest and it's not necessary?
What we are really trying to do, first of all, they need to understand the dangers. What health consequences is it bringing to these women and girls? Again, they also need to understand how is it, we are really left behind economically because education is not for girls. Circumcision is done as a rite of passage from girlhood to womanhood. That means girls don't have a chance to go to school. They are married at that early age, either 12 years or 13 years. So how do they realize the value of the girl child, invest in their education so that they can also make better and informed decisions? And that is what we've been doing with these communities. But morally, is about, you see, when you talk about issues of female, if you talk about alternative rites of passage, remember, we are not forcing people to change. We are not forcing the community to change. We are just having dialogues, because remember, changing culture is not easy. It's about talking one day at a time and, taking them through a whole process.
Thank you so much. Nice Nailantei Leng'ete. I believe you're here in Paris to carry out some more conversations with other people working against FGM around the world. So we hope that you make some progress with those engagements. Thanks very much for coming in to see us.
Thank you.
Okay, so Amnesty International has condemned Madagascar's prisons as being cruel and inhuman. 129 detainees died in 2017. 52 of them were only in pre-trial detention. Authorities have been trying to make improvements, but progress so far has been slow. Our team headed into one prison and sent us this report.
The inmates restlessly sleep crammed into one small cell. Every hour, a guard claps his hands, a signal for the curled-up men to change position. Amnesty International recorded the footage in Madagascar last year. The video caused outrage when it was made public. It's since become more difficult to document conditions inside the country's prisons. We were only allowed to film here, in the under-18 building of Antananarivo prison. Like 80% of the detainees, 17-year-old Finn is still waiting for his trial. We cannot show his face.
There are more pre-trial detainees than convicted detainees. Trials take too much time. For example, I've been waiting 8 months. We suffer a lot because it's a confined area and the number of detainees is increasing.
He is afraid of falling ill because of the overcrowding. Since the end of last year, over 900 people have already died on the island in an outbreak of measles.
Here, a lot of people are sick. Some have typhoid, fever, measles. We're sick because of the bad hygiene. We are too many people here. It's too crowded. There's not enough air. 53 of us sleep in this cell.
Today, Finn will enjoy a brief moment of respite. A group of volunteer artists are organizing a one-day festival with several workshops. Finn has chosen dance.
I'm happy. I'm not frustrated like every other day. I'm so happy. I'm like a free man today. It's like I was given a second life.
Entertainment like this is available to prisoners about 6 times a year.
They are malnourished, they have no entertainment, they have nothing. So it is our way to give a bit of happiness to those children, to those detainees.
A few hours of happiness, but a much longer wait for any real improvement. The prison system is desperately underfunded. In a bid to deal with malnutrition and overcrowding, the prison budget is due to go up by 1.5 million euros this year.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
Here at France 24, we're taking a broad outlook by talking about the women who are reshaping our world.
En France 24 en español no tenemos temas vedados. Y eso se puede ver en televisión y en todas las plataformas que tenemos en Internet.
في فرانس 24 لا ننسى ونحجز لكم أسبوعياً تذكرة عودة للمدن والمناطق التي كانت في قلب الأحداث قبل أن تدخل في طي النسيان.
France 24, c'est la recherche permanente des meilleurs spécialistes pour vous permettre de déchiffrer l'actualité.
Claro que tiene algo especial, somos todos de distintos países y trabajamos con todo el corazón para entregar información en el momento preciso.
أخبار سياسية واقتصادية وثقافية وأيضاً رياضية بأعين خبراء رياضيين. هذه هي قناة فرانس 24.
For tens of thousands of refugees in 2015, the Greek island of Lesbos became the gateway to Europe. For their welcome to the refugees, the people of Lesbos were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But today,
sympathy has given way to exasperation. Thousands of migrants remain stuck on the island, awaiting examination of their asylum requests. Their living conditions are inhumane. They risk losing everything. Our report highlights their plight and the exhaustion of the people of Lesbos.
We revisit the migrants of Lesbos all this week on France 24.
Hello and welcome to France 24. I'm Delano de Souza and we are live from Paris. The headlines this hour. Tensions running high in Venezuela as Juan Guaido heads to the border with Colombia to let in humanitarian aid. Security forces attempt to stop one of the convoys from making the journey. Nicolas Maduro, meanwhile, threatens to shut the border with Colombia. Pope Francis attempts to right the wrongs of the past, the pontiff calling on bishops to listen to the cries of the little ones seeking justice as he kicks off a conference on child sex abuse at the Vatican. And French authorities are working to confirm if Fabien Klein has been killed. According to reports, the man whose voice claimed responsibility for the Paris attacks back in November 2015 died in an airstrike in Syria. Pope Francis says he wants to fight the enemy within. The pontiff promising more than just a public relations exercise. This as he opened a conference aimed at confronting the child sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. The Pope urged bishops who have gathered from around the world to listen to the cries of the little ones seeking justice.
Top bishops from all over the world gather in the Vatican for the first day of a landmark summit on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. But lurking in the shadows of the conference, skepticism from some abuse survivors, for whom the event resembles more of a public relations exercise than a genuine push for change. Perhaps in anticipation of such doubt, in his opening remarks, the Pope recognized that victims expect substantive action to be taken.
The holy people of God look at us and expect from us not simple and obvious condemnations, but concrete and effective measures to put into place. We need concreteness, so let us begin our journey armed with faith and the spirit of maximum boldness, courage and concreteness.
After the Pope's opening remarks, Cardinal Luis Tagle of the Philippines, widely considered a contender to be the next Pope, delivered an emotional keynote speech. Focused on the theme of responsibility, he acknowledged the Church's failure to address crimes perpetrated by Catholic officials.
Our lack of response to the suffering of victims, even to the point of rejecting them and covering up the scandal to protect perpetrators and the institution, has injured our people, leaving a deep wound in our relationship with those we are sent to serve.
The four-day summit is centered around three themes: responsibility, accountability, and transparency. It will include talks on the best practices to adopt to confront abuse, group discussions among bishops, and a ceremony for abuse survivors.
To Venezuela next, where tensions are running high. Opposition leader Juan Guaido is currently on his way to the border with Colombia. The man, considered Venezuela's legitimate head of state, is determined to let in humanitarian aid into the country by this Saturday. He's traveling to the Colombian border with some 80 lawmakers, and security forces did try to stop some of his convoy from making the journey. Now, for his part, Nicolas Maduro denies there is a humanitarian crisis in the country. He's closed the border with Brazil and has threatened to do the same with Colombia. Now, amidst all this tension, rival concerts will be held tomorrow. British billionaire Richard Branson will be hosting a pro-aid concert on the Colombian side of the border, while artists loyal to Nicolas Maduro will be playing just some 300 meters away. For more on all this, we can go across to Ana Herrero, standing by for us in Caracas. Ana, Juan Guaido says aid will be coming into Venezuela on the 23rd of this month. Is that likely to happen?
Well, it's not likely if we look at what's going on today. Several members of the Congress tried to leave Caracas and they couldn't make it past the state of Carabobo. We are talking about a 12-hour ride where apparently or allegedly Guaido was following them. Now, we don't know exactly where Guaido might be. A report from a Spanish agency said that he's already on the border, which means that he maybe left earlier and before this Congress members. But still, this is not confirmed by his team. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at National Guards just blocking the way. And there's a video going around on Twitter that shows a National Guard actually going inside of a truck and trying to get the keys of the driver to force them to block the way so that the Congress members couldn't pass that. Now, Nicolas Maduro, as you said, already blocked the border with Brazil. That is starting 8 p.m. local time today. And there is no communications with Aruba, Curaçao, or Bonaire. So he also said that he's thinking about doing the same with the Colombian border. So we don't know what's going to happen, but it doesn't seem very likely. The only way the opposition has to make this happen, to make this real, is if the military cooperate with them.
Now, Anna, what are people where you are saying about these rival concerts that's going to take place tomorrow? One on the Colombian side of the border and one just 300 meters away in Venezuela.
Well, people are trying to see what's going to happen after the concert. Some are trying to cross over to Cucuta to see the concert with international artists, more than 20 artists. And the government did it and announced that the rival concert recently, just a few days ago. It's only loyal artists of the government and local artists. And they are saying, Nicolas Maduro said this would be huge, and that he expected people to be very peaceful tomorrow. Now, the government also announced that the concert is going to be, it's going to happen for 2 days. It's going to happen the first day, it's going to be tomorrow, and then the Saturday. And also on Saturday, according to them, they're going to deliver what they call humanitarian aid, meaning the boxes of food they deliver to poor neighborhoods in Venezuela. The same 20,000 of those boxes are going to Cucuta because, according to the government, the people in Cucuta need it because they're suffering the consequences of a very bad government.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much for that update. Anna Herrera reporting there for us from Caracas. In other news, a top French jihadist within the Islamic State group has been reportedly killed in an airstrike. Security sources confirming the information of Fabien Clin's death to French TV station France Info. Clin became known to the authorities in France after an audio recording claiming responsibility for the Paris attacks in November 2015. Yuka Roya reports.
He's one of the best-known French members of the Islamic State group. Fabien Clin, a 41-year-old jihadist on Interpol's most wanted list. He's believed to have been killed in a coalition airstrike at this camp in Bahrouz, the last pocket of the militants' territory in Syria. His brother, Jean-Michel, here on the left, is said to have been seriously wounded in the air raid. According to US intelligence, the brothers were identified to be living here 3 months ago and had been followed closely for several days before the targeted airstrike. Radio France says that the French government is waiting for a DNA analysis in order to confirm the man's death. Fabien Clin is known as the French voice of the Islamic State group. It was him who read out a statement claiming the November 2015 Paris attacks the day after the carnage.
Fabien Clin is known first and foremost for his communicational role. In terms of operations, his name was associated with Sid Ahmed Glam, the suspect in a failed terror attack in Villejuif. But so far we don't have any information about any direct role he may have played in those terror attacks.
In the early 2000s, Clin joined a terrorist recruitment cell in a village called Artigat near Toulouse in the south of France, where a group of youths became radicalized. Among its other members, Mohamed Merah, the perpetrator of 2012 shooting attacks. The cell was led by Salafist preacher Olivier Corral, known as the White Emir. In 2009, Clin was sentenced to 4 years in prison for helping send young jihadists to fight in Iraq. A few years later, Clin, along with his brother, left for Syria, where they gradually rose through the ranks of the Islamic State group.
Now, a new study that's come out here in France shows life expectancy of the country's citizens is growing, but at a slower rate. Men have a life expectancy of just over 79 years, while women can expect to live past the age of 85. But it's not all good news. Men in the country can expect to be in good health until the age of 62, while women the age of 64. That's below the European average. To talk more about this, we can bring in Jay Olshansky, professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. How do you read these numbers for France?
Well, keep in mind the numbers for France are based on highly reliable vital registration data for the country. So we're pretty comfortable with the reliability of the numbers themselves. Interestingly enough, we're seeing the exact same phenomenon in most parts of the developed world today. We're seeing a deceleration in the rate of increase in life expectancy in some countries, and a leveling off in others, and even a decline, like in the United States. So it's not an unheard of phenomenon.
Does life expectancy have to plateau at some point, in your opinion?
Of course. I mean, think about it. Really, do you think we can all live to 150 or 200 years? For the same reason that we're seeing plateaus in world records for Olympic events, like how fast we can skate or how far we can throw something or run. For the same reason, we see fundamental limits on how long humans can live, and there's little or no question that they exist. The question is, have we hit them? Have we hit those limits yet? And there seems to be some evidence to suggest that we have, or we're at least approaching them.
Now, you said that there has been a decline in the United States. Why?
In the U.S., we've seen a pretty dramatic increase in adult onset and childhood obesity that's beginning to play itself out in higher death rates at middle ages. So the obesity epidemic has been a very powerful negative force on life expectancy. And of course, diabetes and cardiovascular disease is associated with it, some forms of cancer as well. But we also have an opioid epidemic that is having a powerful negative effect on death rates and life expectancy at middle ages. And that has a pretty powerful influence on life expectancy. I don't know if opioids are having the same effect in France, but certainly the obesity epidemic is.
Okay, it's definitely not as rampant in France. I want to bring it back to France now because, as you know, France has one of the best social security systems in the world. So why is it then that the age of good health, the age is lower than the European average?
So that's an interesting question. And some of us believe that it may be associated with the fact that France has one of the highest life expectancies anywhere in the world. So, keep in mind, the longer you live, the higher the probability that you're going to face some aging-related issue. So if you push out the envelope of survival for women, for example, past 85, it's inevitable that many of them are going to face the negative consequences of aging. So it may be a byproduct of success. I mean, the longer you live, the higher the probability frailty and disability will occur. So I'm not surprised that you see something like this.
Okay, Jay Olshansky, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
In other news, sportswear company Nike is in damage control. The company says it's trying to figure out what happened after U.S. college basketball player Zion Williamson suffered a knee injury when his shoe shredded 36 seconds into the game between Duke and the University of North Carolina. Take a look.
Duke was 36 seconds into the game when this happened.
Injured is Zion Williamson.
It turned out to be a mild knee sprain for 18-year-old Zion Williamson, seen by some as the next LeBron James. Barack Obama shouted out, "His shoe broke." The former US president tweeted his support for the star afterwards, saying Zion Williams seems like a nice young man, as well as an outstanding basketball player, wishing him a speedy recovery. It did not stop there, though. It was a field day for Nike's rivals, including Puma, which tweeted that the player should have worn their shoes. That tweet was subsequently deleted, which in itself made the headlines. USA Today calling the tweet poor taste over a mishap. Nike's shares took a hit. The company said, "The quality and performance of our products are of utmost importance. While this is an isolated occurrence, we are working to identify the issue." The incident with Williams' shoe is not the first with Nike products. Nike replaced Adidas in 2017 as the official supplier of basketball jerseys to the NBA, and there have been some complaints about the shirts ripping. While shares dipped, the memes on Twitter soared. Nike having a very bad shoe day.
Time next for the business news with Kate Moody. Good evening, Kate.
Hi there.
We're counting down to the end of that tariffs truce between the world's two largest economies.
Yeah, it's next Friday, so we really have a lot of pressure as these US and Chinese negotiators kick off their fourth round of high-level talks aimed at diffusing the brewing trade war. Tariffs are set to increase on March 1st if a deal isn't reached, although Donald Trump has raised the possibility of shifting that deadline. On Thursday, U.S. media reports led by Reuters suggested that the two sides are making progress in some key issues and that they're working on 6 memoranda of understanding, which would tackle differences over agriculture, currency, forced technology transfers and cyber theft, intellectual property rights, non-tariff barriers to change, and the exchange of services. You can see that list as reported by Reuters. Now, the meetings are due to wrap up on Friday, but they could be extended as the end-of-the-month deadline approaches. Meanwhile, Donald Trump appeared to hold out something of an olive branch to Chinese tech giant Huawei. The U.S. president tweeted that he wants American companies to take the lead in rolling out 5 and currently non-existent 6G wireless networks. But he said they should win through competition, not by blocking out currently more advanced technologies. His administration has been leading a campaign against Huawei, encouraging its allies to bar it on security concerns. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. We saw a mixed close for the major European indices. The banking sector was the weakest as a Swedish lender was drawn into Danske Bank's money laundering scandal. The FTSE 100 down over 0.8% in London. On Wall Street, we saw a negative close there. The Nasdaq snapping an 8-day winning streak to close below the flat line. Some mixed economic data weighing on U.S. stocks there, that included a slight rise in durable goods orders, but a drop in confidence and activity, according to 3 separate surveys. Shares of Domino's Pizza dragged 9% on disappointing sales. As Senegal prepares for this weekend's election, the economy has been a central issue on the campaign trail. The incumbent, Macky Sall, has been pushing his platform to open a new era of development focused on infrastructure and education. Claire Rush reports.
Putting Senegal on track for a new economic future. This new train line, inaugurated by President Macky Sall, is symbolic of his economic vision for the country, along with the new international airport and over 200 kilometers of highways. They're key pillars of his emerging Senegal plan.
The plan was launched in 2015. In the 4 years since then, we've had an average growth rate of 6.5%.
The over 6% growth rate was one of the highest in Africa last year. It was largely driven by mining, construction, and services, according to the IMF. Analysts predict further growth in the coming years, following the recent discovery of offshore oil and gas reserves. But over a quarter of the population works in agriculture, according to the World Bank. The seasonal nature of the industry means that underemployment is a problem, affecting some 40% of the workforce, while 90% of workers are in the informal labor market. But overall, the unemployment rate is low, around 6%. For some Senegalese, there are more pressing issues than the economy.
We are an underdeveloped country. We have base-level needs: water, electricity, education and health.
Despite sustained growth, nearly half the population lives below the poverty line, according to the last official survey in 2011. Translating growth into poverty reduction will remain a challenge for the next president.
Cuba has reported record sales of cigars and tobacco production, despite a global trend away from smoking. Sales of Cuban cigars rose 7% to a record $537 million last year. Spain is the #1 buyer, although demand has grown fastest in China and other countries in East Asia. France, which used to be #2 on the list, saw a dip in sales as a 17% tax on tobacco products took effect. That's all from me for now, Delano.
You never see anyone smoking cigars in France.
Very rarely.
Nor in Spain, for that matter. Surprised, I didn't know they were #1.
Perhaps they're buying and not smoking. It's hard to tell.
Keeping it indoors. Thank you very much for that. Kate Moody there with a look at the day's business news. It's time now for Media Watch with James Creedon. Good evening, James.
Hi, Dana.
You're starting out with reactions as the Catholic Church convenes that summit on child sex abuse over at the Vatican.
Yes, that's right. Lots of headlines on that, as you can imagine. The paedophilia plague, Francis's battle against abuse and silence. Not a very cheerful headline, to say the least. But actually, there have been very few cheerful headlines when it comes to the Catholic Church for quite a while. And just to give it kind of a quick flick through what we've been seeing over the last week, here's another very cheerful headline for the Vatican. This was in relation to a book released by a French sociologist in the last week, and Frédéric Martel. It's called Sodoma, and it's talking about how 80% of the clergy in the Vatican are homosexual, and about all of the issues kind of related to that. You can see their kind of funky graphics as well. Stained glass window. We'll have more of that in a little while. And then there was a French film that about paedophilia, a paedophilia case in France. Grâce à Dieu, it won a Silver Bear in Berlin. By the grace of God, it put the spotlight on some of the I suppose, Father Prenet, one particular case of predatory sexual abuse, and indeed that film has been getting a lot of attention here in France. This is an interview with one of the real-life victims that drama is based on. So this is the kind of stuff we've been seeing in the run-up to this conference, and indeed a lot of people saying, you know, what is really going to change? We've been hearing a lot of the same rhetoric coming out of the Vatican now for a decade or longer, 2 decades even. What can we expect to change? This is an interview with Peter Stanford, former editor of the Catholic Herald newspaper, and he said, look, if you go back to the 90s, John Paul II referred to a few bad apples who abused children. Obviously, we know now that it was much more than that. The current Pope has, sounded positive, made positive sounds, but in fact, the rhetoric has often been somewhat similar. He blamed the devil at one point, saying a malign force tempting otherwise good priests is what is to blame for the sexual abuse of children. So he asks, is there any real possibility of a road to Damascus shift or change or moment for Catholicism? And he says, naively perhaps, I continue to hope so. It will involve, he thinks, rethinking an entire approach to sexuality that is peculiar, punitive, and often plain perverse.
I think
so
everyone's waiting for big bang reforms to come out of the Vatican, which don't ever come out.
That's right. So there is a great degree of skepticism online as well, but there are some voices like that saying, look, this could be the thinking that will see things shift. And what we are, I suppose, it has elements, I would almost say, of maybe a peace and reconciliation type moment where at least people are getting to air their grievances. The Pope, as is often the case, is speaking a lot about forgiveness, referring to, a lot of language such as the Holy Spirit to sustain us through these days, to help us to transform this evil into an opportunity for awareness and purification. So clothed very much in the language of Catholicism and forgiveness. But actually one moment today got a lot of applause, really, because instead of talking of forgiveness, there was a lot of talk here of suffering. And I think there's a sense that this needs to be a moment for the airing of grievances and for the acknowledgement that there has been a great degree of suffering, as well as, of course, a shift in policies. This is a Filipino cardinal, and he spoke, again, I suppose, very Catholic language, speaking about the wounds of Christ and suffering and whatnot. I'll just finish with that rather grim cartoon. This is in Le Monde. Breaking a taboo is the byline for that cartoon, and you can see there various scenes that indicate abuse and a broken stained glass window breaking through the taboo.
Okay. In other news, James, officials at Nike are scratching their heads after Zion Williamson's shoe split during a game.
That's right. Very bad buzz.
Shoes aren't supposed to do that.
Certainly not athletes' shoes. And this was 30 minutes in. He got a twisted ankle as a result of it. And there is a very
36 seconds into it, actually.
Was it 30 seconds? 6 seconds in? Well, it certainly isn't a good image for Nike. And what we were seeing here is various commentators. This is Kevin Frazier of Entertainment TV Now, etc. Various people like that saying, man, y'all better get that kid some legit shoes. So again, that doesn't, I'm sure Nike weren't so happy about that.
Apparently Barack Obama was at that match.
Barack, I have his tweet. He didn't mention the shoes, but he did mention Zion Williamson. And Puma thought they'd weigh in on it. Wouldn't have happened in the Pumas. They deleted that, but of course they knew that it would be screen grabbed in the meantime. And then we have fake ads. Believe in something, even if it means producing an inferior product that can't help keep the number one player in the country safe on a basketball court. Nike just do it. Lots of references then to, was it revenge by a child manufacturer somewhere? maybe bad taste, but look, I think Nike can cushion it. They went down in the stocks, but I think they'll go back up.
And very quickly, James, now pétanque enthusiasts aren't happy that it won't be included as an Olympic sport.
That's right.
You play pétanque.
Various sports, such as breakdancing, are being proposed for inclusion in the Olympics, and that is probably going to get through along with surfing and whatnot. But there was a degree of chagrin in France today, as pétanque, as pétanque didn't get in. And one publication that was upset about it was Planète Boule, which sounds as weird in French as it does in English. Planet Balls, and so they on their Twitter account were saying that our Olympic dream has flown away. The balls will not be present at the Olympics. And pétanque, for those who don't know, is kind of heavy iron balls, and it's, you hit one ball with another.
But it's odd that breakdancing would be, selected and not pétanque.
And not pétanque. It's true. It's true. Anyway, much more. I'm not sure. Yes, much more on that, but perhaps we'll leave it there.
Okay, James, thank you very much for that. James Creedon there with Media Watch. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. More to come. We're live from Paris.
Je regarde France 24 parce qu'en tant qu'étudiante en sciences politiques, ça me permet de rester à jour sur les informations dans le monde, sur les conflits, les débats politiques, tout ça.
الاختلاف بين فرنسا 24 والقنوات التانية في المحتوى المتنوع